Naro.
Mr Speaker, thank you. I rise and take a call on the Social Security Clothing Allowance for Orphans and Unsupported Children Amendment Bill in its second reading. Mr Speaker, this is my third speech in the House today. And as with it being Members' Day, I've always begun the speech by acknowledging the sponsor of the bills that I've been able to speak on. And because like all members, we look for our Members' Bill to be drawn out of the ballot because it allows us to be the champion of a cause that we believe wholeheartedly about and passionately. It allows us to connect with our communities and to advocate in a way that we believe makes a difference. However, the challenges before any member with their Members' Bill is to see that it aligns with the government of the day, with the intentions that are true and right, and obviously connects with that which is fiscally responsible, all of those things that make it important. So I just want to acknowledge the member Tracy Martin for the cause that you have championed. And I can start off my speech by saying that the National Government will support this bill in the second reading. And it is fortuitous of the 1st of July, which is your birthday. But I think most importantly, and you and I were on the Ministerial Reference Group, and what we heard from a number of different members that are part of the sector of support that are out there in our community Mr Speaker, to those that were out there in the community, like Catherine Rich, who was the chair. There was also Diane Vivian from Grandparents Raising Children, a feisty little grandmother who has a bucket of energy and just wants to go out and make a difference. She shared with us the survey that they had polled their grandparents, and what it clearly showed that at the moment we have around about 8,500 carers, kin carers that are out there that are caring for around approximately 12,000 children. And as Mrs Martin has said, often these children, for no fault of their own, are in circumstances often of brokenness and despair, and are really just looking for some support and help. And that's why this bill, and I totally support this bill, and I know the government supports this bill, because it's the right bill for the right need and for its right purpose. So we believe that it's important to that. Then comes down to the aspect of how do we make this work within our means, but at the same time too, how do we make it work for those in need? I believe that our role in the reference group was to be able to hear from those providers and to hear the things that were important. So Diane Vivian talked about the importance of grandparents and how do we make sure that their support was there. Often they would just end up on their front doorstep and they had to immediately meet for their needs. There was things like beds, drawers, clothes, food in the cupboard. Many of them were still of working age, and yet at the same time too, they were only making ends meet for themselves. So they needed that support. So we heard that from Diane Vivian. We also heard from Linda Surtees, who was with foster carers, and she talked about the importance of the system playing its role, working with schools, the importance of that and how that worked in regards to the allowances, which is what this bill is actually about, around parity for the allowance of clothes for children. And I know that Mrs Martin made it clear to us all the way through, all the other allowances that we're providing for were important, were for the needs, but that didn't include what this bill was about. So I commend you, Tracy, on making sure, Tracy Martin, that we were true to what this bill was. Also too want to mention Katie Murray from up in the far north. And what she reminded us of was this, about some of the reality. While people keep saying we want more and more and more money, more resources, she also was a challenger for those who were receiving that. So from the inside looking out, she said that sometimes we also need to challenge those who receive this resource. How are they prioritising? That's something that we can't do, because from the outside, in the sense of trying to give these sorts of messages, it can make us look like we're mean-spirited and cold-hearted and trying to force change, when really, for Katie Murray and the work that she does in the far north, it was important to say, this is what she's seeing, these are the challenges that she's making as well. An important fact that also came out of that conversation was the fact that nearly 45% of those children, of the 12,000, are Māori children. And I think that's an important issue to be raised, because out of this, while we talk about the generic aspect of children, there are our Māori children and whānau that absolutely need this help. And we believe that this bill will be a way of being able to address that. Mr Speaker, I just want to comment on a few things just as Mrs Martin has talked about. At the Select Committee, we believe that there were two amendments that needed to be made to the clauses. Amending clause number 2 to delay the commencement of this new legislation should it be passed until the 1st of July 2018. It seems like a long way away, but as they say, 1 week in politics Can be a long time, can be a short time, but I believe that we've come to an agreement that we will work towards that and believe that it's important. And also too that in the payment of clothing related allowances for foster children, orphans and unsupported children, should the school and the year start-up payment be no longer available. The second amendment that was made in the Select Committee was amending clause number 4 to clarify that an orphan or unsupported child would be entitled to a clothing allowance only if the Chief Executive used their discretion to set a rate of payment for a clothing allowance for foster children under Section 363 of the Children, Young Persons and Their Families Act. National does support this bill. We believe it's a good bill. We have had positive negotiations with Tracy Martin. National believes that we can provide further financial assistance to kin carers in a better way, in a more targeted way. While we talked about the universal aspect of providing generically for all children in need in regards to unsupported child benefit and orphans benefit, we also then looked at some of the targeted approaches. And I just want to make mention of them because I think that the targeted approaches also too came out of the Ministerial Reference Group. And so here's some of the things that they talked about. The government recognised the incredible work done by these families. So there's the Extraordinary Care Fund. More than 300 children and young people have benefited from the first round of this fund. And this fund recognised the job that grandparents and extended family members do in raising their children who come into their care. So what we've done is that grants are now available for up to $2,000 per child, and this round of funding distributed more than $360,000. The example I want to give that came out of Katie Murray, for instance, she said there are times in which, yes, you provide for the basic needs for the children in your care, such as uniforms, beds, food and so forth. But she said, but then how do we help them to achieve their dreams when, in a sense, their lives have been tragically with trauma? How do we find a way to excel that? She talked about there are times in the children that she's cared for, what about if there was an opportunity for them to excel in sports? And she talked about a number of the young children that she'd cared for. And so taking them to, for instance, representative sports teams or functions or events. And she said that this is another part that if we're going to help them overcome their circumstance and not allow their circumstance to define their destiny, she said this Extraordinary Care Fund would be an important inclusion into the fund as well. So I want to acknowledge that, that we heard this and believe that this was a very important part of the support that we wanted to offer as well. There'd been about 36 applicants that were successful in that inaugural funding round, and we're providing extra support so that the children these carers were looking after have the opportunity to truly reach their full potential to thrive, achieve and to belong as well. The second round of the Extraordinary Care Fund opens in January of 2015, been passed, and an additional 3 funding rounds are planned for 2015 and 2016 as well. Just a couple of other comments I want to make, and as I begin to summarise, Mr. Speaker, is that also too, we heard from the Ministerial Reference Group, the dedicated person at work and income, in regards to being able to provide that support. Often when grandparents came there, they felt that sometimes some of the frontline support they got were a bit unsure about what they needed. They asked for a dedicated person to work with them. And also to, lastly, some greater parenting support. Often, and this was from Diane Vivian, she said that many times grandparents are having to sort of reparent themselves. It's been a long time since they'd been parenting. And so in partnership with grandparents raising grandchildren and the Parenting Place, we've also developed a tailored toolbox program specifically for kin carers at a cost of around $600,000 a year as well. It's a refresher course for grandparents. Mr. Speaker, I conclude my remarks by congratulating Mrs. Martin on her tenacity and her passion and her ability to be able to advocate very strongly, but also put together what I think is a good bill, a practical bill, which I believe will meet the needs and support of our children, and especially those who are kin carers. I commend this bill to the House.